you see it in the bulletin, but because of my little inclusive heart, yes, be seated, please. You're like, come on, seriously? Yeah, I'm going to have you stand for the whole sermon. So, because of my heart wanting to make sure that everybody's included and nobody is left out and everybody gets the message, right? I mentioned last week, and I'll say again, this summer, just about 3 weeks' time, starting in June and then July, we're going to be changing our worship schedule just a little bit, taking 8:30 and 11 o'clock and bringing them in together at 10 in the morning. We'll have a fellowship time before that, along with some teaching, some interesting different speakers, 9 in total over the course of the summer, just so that we can have a different rhythm of life and we can have a way of reconnection with each other. I will say it's great for those that have been here for a while, but especially for those that may be new, even first time visiting today, that is going to be such a wonderful time to really see the spirit of our church, the life that's in it, the thriving people that are in it, and you might be able to learn a few names a bit better. And so commend that to you, and I hope that you'll come. But as I think about these pews and how they might look a little different because our whole family will be gathered, I also think about another bench, in a way, in my own life. I know some of you are closer to me know this story of a person because she's in my office. You can see on the shelf right by my desk a kind of yellowed picture, you know, with the fake coloring that they used to do of very older photographs of 3 women, 2 that are my great aunt and my grandmother, and then the one in the middle is my great grandmother, Mary Olive Key. Now, I never got to meet her, but through oral tradition of family, she became the picture of a person that I just wanted to become more like. And I think there's a sense where we as Christians might find some identity in her if we're living out the gospel message too, because, you know, Mary Olive was not someone who was well-to-do, right? She was kind of a hard oil field woman in North Louisiana, always kind of living in the barracks or the shotgun houses that are provided for families there. And all 6 of the members of my mother's side of the family were growing up there in 3 bedrooms and a small kitchen. And she never had anything like China. She really kind of kept things as simple as she could because, you know, they didn't have much and potentially had to move around here and there. So she never knew all the details that a lot of proper women of the time knew about etiquette and place settings and the finer things of life. But that didn't bother her in the least bit, as you thought it might. She was a woman of great etiquette, but a different code of etiquette, and operated on a whole different kind of level. She was known all around the Oldfield compound as the person, the house, the table to go to if you needed a good bite to eat. So for hard women of that day weren't ones to show love or mushy affection, let's say, but like many women in maybe your family and mine, she was a food pusher. And that was the way that she showed love to those around. They'd say, "Miss Key, can I have a bite?" And she said, "Of course, honey, there's always room for you. Let me get my ladle and pull something out of my pot." And then they might be eating, and she would look and see that their plate is empty and say, "Of course, do you want seconds? You want seconds, baby?" And we find that in the South, where we live, the table is often the place where there can be the most polite conversation. Even around crawfish tables or tailgate tables, wherever we gather around, there are these unsaid and unwritten rules where those Southern etiquette rules reign supreme. And it's kind of those things like don't talk about religion or politics or anything discomforting or polarizing like today's issue about whether Harry was treated correctly at the king's coronation, right? Emily Post, in her Rules for Good Table Etiquette, says this: manners are a sensitive awareness of the feelings of others. So if you have that awareness, then you have good manners, no matter what fork you use. So the wood or the plastic or whatever material your table that you gather around most of the time or find the greatest amount of belonging and connection and memory and joy, if that table could talk, I imagine for all of us what the stories are that it could tell. And so the story today, a parable that Jesus tells, is one where we hear about a breach of etiquette around that table. He told about a master who got snubbed by his excuse-making friends, all seemingly good reasons, but he told his servants to go out into the streets instead and in the alleyways of the town to bring in the poor and the crippled and the lame and the blind. And in this time in Palestine, early first century, the people who were crippled and lame and blind didn't exactly get disability checks. They relied on the kindness of strangers. They were completely dependent upon what people gave them in the street, dependent on the community, their neighborhood, even strangers for their survival. But they were still socially acceptable enough to be kept inside the city gates. Just enough to make people feel higher than them and perhaps more important. So when they were invited, they all came in and they looked around, as the story says, and there was still room. So the master sent the servants out a second time, but this time to the country roads, which is code language for the Bible's outer darkness, the place that no one wants to find themselves, where people too foul or too filthy they are to be let in. Lepers and lunatics and people who smelled so bad they made bystanders physically ill, even thieves who had a long rap sheet. Ones who, like the man, got beat up in the Good Samaritan story. A world of danger was out there, they knew. And the master beckoned them to be in his own home. So I just want us to take stock for a second and think back to the first time that you were really invited to a table that mattered to you. Maybe some of you automatically think of the little kids' table at Thanksgiving or whatever holiday you had, and when all of a sudden, whether it was age or whether it was maturity or whether it was matriculation of family in the house, you got to go from the kid table to the grown-up table. Maybe you realize it's not that great, right? No more food fights. Or maybe it's a different table of belonging professionally or personally or in your story of faith that is that one that automatically is the image that takes over your vision. When were you last hungry and didn't know where to be fed? How would your life and my life be different if that invitation hadn't been offered, if that food hadn't been made graciously available? Perhaps today most of us can't identify specifically with the outcasts themselves, but at least we can identify with the hunger that they experienced. For we are people hungry of grace and hope and forgiveness and for a second chance. And it's only those of us that have truly known a hunger and a need for God that have been satisfied that will really read this story differently. If you haven't had that visceral sense, that spiritual sense, that mental, emotional sense of being taken over by that need and that lack and looking for its fulfillment, then you won't hear it. You won't hear it. People like you and I assume, who have truly known the need for grace and have experienced receiving it, always find a way to make room. You know that it's often not enough to just open the table or to give the invite. You have to actually invite others in and then shift yourself in such a way, whether it be a bodily shift or a shift within your spirit, within yours and my frame of how we see a situation, to really create a generous space for people to feel like they belong there. Jesus struggled with this earlier with his disciples trying to grab the greatest seat at the banquet. In verse 13 and 14 in this gospel passage, he says, "When you give a banquet, don't invite your family and your rich neighbors. Invite those in need around you, and you will be blessed. Although they can't repay you, you may be repaid in the resurrection of the righteous." So why am I talking about all this today whenever we're slinking into the summer and everybody's going to be off on vacation and doing all the things? We're all taken up by the myriad of activities that are all stacked up on each other. Why now? I think part of that is because I've become aware after this COVID reality and the changes that churches and institutions all over have had to make. People are starting to finally settle in and notice a difference in what was and what is now. And sometimes it's the hardest heart thing for us to do, to find ourselves in a place of abundance rather than a relative place of lack. I know many are excited about us gathering together this summer in one service, and I am too. But I don't want us to think that it is simply for us to fill the pews in such a way that, finally, no more spaces we have to fill. Friends, I believe our growth, and even more importantly, our depth as a church, our growth and our depth as people of faith, will be directly proportionate to how much room we are willing to make at the table. Now, no matter how seemingly full or complete or empty or incomplete it might be. Maybe God might be doing the holy work in us, I hope, to see when and look around you, even in the spaces in between your kids and your family, this space that's there, that teal cushion or the seat upstairs, looking at that empty space, how do you receive it? Does it seem like a place of lack that reminds you of what's not right with the world, or what maybe you're not doing right, or a church isn't doing right? Or might it be seen differently, as maybe even the image of a rear end in that seat if we scooch as close as we can to the other person beside us? We're kind of hesitant to get close to each other as maybe we were in decades past. You know, the fire marshal kind of sets numbers for people with one butt cheek now. And it really, we find ourselves kind of needing more space because we're used to the distance. I wonder, even in the relative fullness that might be coming, what might a discipline of making room and scooching across the bench to make even more empty space that feels like gift and opportunity and possibility to bless people? Maybe that's a turning. Maybe that is a way of prayer that might actually save our hearts from the places of pain that we willingly stake ourselves in. Because there is always room at the table. You and I are the kind of church, you and I are the body of Christ that always says that there's room for just one more. There's always room, no matter what troubles people have experienced, there's always room for you. No matter what side of the aisle you stand on, no matter who you love, there's always room. As we prepare to receive God's feast today, as we prepare to receive the real presence of God today, I want you to meditate on these words from Shauna Niequist. We don't come to the table to fight or to defend. We don't come to prove or to conquer, to draw lines in the sand or to stir up trouble. We come to the table because our hunger brings us there. We come with a need. We come with fragility, with an admission of our humanness. The table is the great equalizer. The level playing field many of us have been looking everywhere for. God's table is the place where the doing stops, the trying ceases, the masks are removed, and we allow ourselves to be nourished like children. So next time when someone comes in here, or when you meet someone out there saying, "I'm hungry," in body or spirit, I know that as a church, as people of faith, you will answer, "Yeah, sweetheart, I see your plate is empty. You want seconds?" And when someone comes in asking, "Is this seat taken?" I know as a church you're going to answer, "Not at all, honey, this seat is for you." There's always room for you. So continue making room for all those that God will help you and I encounter in our lives, all those that God will bring. Pray for it, seek it. Let our discomfort with an empty seat call us to reach intentionally for it. So this pew, these table benches, this place where chosen and biological family come together will serve as the very bench where all who are hungry are fed. Amen.